Hi students, congratulations. You've made it through college and now you're moving on to probably one of the most important and exciting times of your life. Unfortunately, as teachers, we never give you a course called Life 101 that's going to tell you what's coming next. What should you expect? This presentation is going to be a quick guide to try and alleviate some of that. Now, I'm going to warn you ahead of time. I am not a tax pro. I am not an accountant. I'm just going to tell you a bunch of things that have worked for me over my 25-year career as an engineer. So let's begin. Geek lesson number one. Don't go on a huge spending spree after graduation. Okay, when you guys get that first job and you're making 65,000 a year, you're going to feel like a billionaire. Okay. What I don't want you to do is go off and buy a whole bunch of toys, buy a new car, get yourself into a whole lot of debt load that's going to cause you financial hardship later. Make a budget and stick to it. Your first few years after graduation will be some of the most cash-strapped times of your life. You're going to find that you're going to want a house, you're probably going to get married, you're going to buy a car, kids are going to come along, and it's all going to be really quick and really expensive. So let's take a look at what a budget should look like. Here are some typical monthly finances. And these numbers are all based on what I paid. So let's assume that you've got a $60,000 a year job. You're putting $15,000 a year into a 401k. You have no health insurance costs because it's being covered by your employer, which may or may not be realistic today. It was for me, may not be for you. In that case, you can expect to take home about $2,700 a month. And I want you to notice, $60,000 a year, that means your employer is paying about $5,000 a month. Almost half of that is being taken away with state and federal taxes, your 401k contribution. Okay, all that big money is not so big when it finally hits your check. So when I was probably 5 years out of school, I bought a $134,000 house in Maine. I paid a 7% mortgage. I did not have to pay PMI because I'm a veteran, but I did have to pay taxes, insurance, and all that good stuff. That was $1,100 a month for that $134,000 house. I bought a used $17,000 car. That cost $380 a month. My typical electric bill was about $100 a month. My car insurance was $720 a year. So, about $60 a month. In the state of Maine, we have a pretty high heating requirement. So you're going to want to put away about $100 a month for heat. And for me, food was about $300 a month. So of the $2,700 I had coming in every month, I had $2,040 going out. So as you look at that, you should say, holy cow, that only leaves me with $660 a month. And in this pro forma budget, there's no student loan payments, there's no mortgage insurance because I'm a veteran. You guys may or may not have to pay that. There's no credit card bills, no entertainment, no health insurance, no baby strollers, none of that. All that other stuff has to come out of $660 a month. So now you getting why I'm saying don't go on a spending spree? So where does all the money go? Here is my current paycheck based on $62,000 a year. And you can see right here, this is the $5,029 that the university pays me every month. I have all of this federal, state withholding taken out. That's $1,000 a month. Now, one thing that's different about my situation as opposed to working out in industry, as a university employee, I have a very good retirement plan. I only have to put in $201 a month into my 403b, which is the same as a 401k but for nonprofits. And the university kicks in $502.86. That is highly, highly unusual. Most places, they'll match you dollar for dollar up to about 4%, or they'll do a half match up to 10%. They don't give you 250% on the first $200. So do not expect this entry or this entry. You can, however, often put in extra. So I put away an extra $10,000 a year. Every month, $833 comes out of my paycheck before taxes. That lowers my effective tax rate, so I pay less on the reduced amount that I actually pay taxes on. And then down here is what I actually take home. I personally like to have a car payment always going into an account. So I pay $290.20 into a car payment account. Whether I'm making a car payment or not, it's always going in there. So if my car should suddenly die and I need another car, the money's sitting there available. And then with a $62,000 a year income, I take home $2,612 a month. Okay, not a lot of money. I claim single zero on my taxes. That way I have more taken out so that I can always get a tax refund. Geek lesson number 2. You're probably going to want to buy a house relatively soon after graduation. Do not trust the banks. This is where we got in trouble in 2008. When buying a house, the old rule was always buy a maximum of 2.5 times your income. So if you make $60,000 a year, look at houses around $150,000. It's the rule that I use, and it has served my wife and me very well. The banks, however, they may approve you for 4 to 5 times your salary. That is way, way, way too much. Do not assume that because you're approved that you can actually afford it. This is the entire reason that the stock market crashed in 2008. People trusted the banks and they didn't do a budget. Okay, when you get your first house, a 30-year fixed mortgage is almost always the best way to go. And the reason is simple. By making the term longer, you can always pay a little bit extra on the principal and turn it into a 10 or 15-year mortgage without refinancing. So if you get tight on money some month, you just don't pay the extra. But if you do have a little bit extra, you can shorten the term. Okay, so let's look at the impact of this. Let's say that you buy a house for $200,000 at 5% interest on a 30-year note. If you pay it back normally, you'll pay back $386,513 thanks to compound interest. That is a lot extra. But if you make one extra payment a year, you're going to cut off 4 years and 8 months, and the repayment goes down to $300,052,723. Okay, so that's a free new car that came out of just not paying mortgage interest. If you can afford 2 extra payment, the loan shortens by 8 years to only a 22-year note. and you save $56,597 in interest. Okay, so paying on that principal really, really shortens things. Geek lesson number 3. Buy a 3-year-old car. 3-year-old cars generally have about 45,000 miles on them, and they cost half the price of a new car. They are a bargain, and they're generally still reliable. So I have 2 nice midlife crisis cars that I bought at 3 years old. They never get wet except to be washed. And I have a $500 rust bucket daily driver with 225,000 miles. And I put all my boring commuter miles on that. It's always nice to have a backup car. Personally, I retire a car at about 300,000 or when the doors don't stay on. I just drive them to death. And it's also nice to have a cheap car when you got to leave it at the airport. If my 99 Jimmy with 225,000 miles gets hit, so what? If my shiny GTO got hit or stolen at the airport, I would not be happy. As a general rule, I expect an alternator to fail on a car. That's the part that makes the electricity to run the headlights and all the toys. 120,000 miles, I replace it. Starters go at 150,000. And I change these whether they need it or not. It's just not worth being on the side of the road over it. Okay, here's a question that I often get, and different people have different thoughts on this. So I drive a heap just so it can rust and my fun cars can stay nice. So the question is, would you put $500 worth of repairs into a $500 car? Many people would say junk it. I say, heck yes, I'm going to fix it. If the average car payment for me is $380, then if that $500 makes the car last another 6 months, well, that saves me almost $2,000 in car payments. Absolutely, I'll put $500 worth of repairs into a $500 car. It just makes financial sense. And I tend to just keep fixing cars until they completely dissolve. Geek lesson 4. Plan to be unemployed. Guys, the days of doing 40 years at GM, getting a gold watch and a pension are over. Mergers, acquisitions, shutdowns, buyouts, changing markets, project completion are all the things that can force you out of a job despite your best efforts or performance. Your only 2 good defenses in this world are cash in the bank and keeping up with the latest skills. Now, that said, whenever I take a job, I always do my best to earn my paycheck. But I'm always trying to gain skills to take me to that next job that I want to go to. Always, always keep looking around. Most financial advisors recommend having 6 months worth of living expenses available as cash. Okay, that's cash. That is not stock, people, at all times. I recommend you should have $20,000 in the bank. And that's $20,000 cash that you do not touch. That is your rainy day fund. Projects have a curious way of ending when economic times are less than ideal. In 2009, I had a job for 18 hours. The market crashed, the project ended, they paid me out of petty cash, and I never went back to that job. Not their fault, it's just things happen. Okay, geek lesson number 5. This one is really, really important when you're young. Max out a retirement plan and a Roth IRA when you are young. Okay, these are personal stock market accounts which let you put away money before it is taxed. That means there's a lot more to compound and it's easier to save. You pay the taxes, because obviously there's no free lunch in the world, as you withdraw the money at whatever the future tax rate is. You also pay less current tax. So if you make 58,000 a year and you put away 18,000, you'll be taxed at the rate of someone making 40K a year. The more you make, the higher the tax percentage is. Now, some people think that future tax rates will go up in the US to levels like Canada and Europe, which are much, much higher. If you want to hedge against that, look at the Roth IRA. Under this plan, you put away money that has already had the taxes paid on it, and your gains grow tax-free under the current rules. That means that when you take it out, you do not pay taxes on it. Now, there are limits to this. You're only allowed to invest in a Roth if your household income is below a certain threshold. Absolutely investigate that before you decide to invest in a Roth. So just in case you don't know what a share of stock is, which we're going to talk about more in the next slides, it's a portion of ownership in a company. So as an example, if a company has a value of $1 million and it issues 1 million shares of stock to raise money for expansion, product development, whatever the case, the cost of the shares will be the value of the company divided by the number of shares. So in this case, it'll be $1 a share. Okay, Geek Lesson 6. This is probably the most important lesson in this whole slideshow. Okay. As young people, you've got a huge advantage when it comes to planning for retirement. And yes, you got to think about that now. I know that's the last thing on your mind. The concept of compound interest can make you really rich and very secure with very little effort if you just start early and do not touch the money. So let's do a little simple example. Let's say that Aunt Sarah gives you $100 at graduation, and you invested in the 30 stocks that make up the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The Dow has historically returned 7% over the last 100 years. There have been spikes, there have been dips, but on average, long term, 7%. After the first year, you're going to have $107. Not too spectacular. After the second year, you're going to receive 7% on $107, or you'll have $114.49. Yeah, still not too crazy. However, over the long haul, over the next 45 years, that value is going to go up to $2,572.89. Now that's pretty impressive. You're going to have almost 26 times what you started with just by investing in the Dow 30 and not touching the money. Let's look at a couple other examples. Okay, let's say you love this presentation, you take everything to heart, you invest the federal maximum every year until retirement, which is currently $18,000 until age 70, and you don't do anything fancy, you just put it on the Dow 30 at 7%. How much are you going to have? Well, you're going to have to retire on a paltry little less than $7 million. And you'll have to struggle along on $478,000 a year if you want to live on just the interest, which, you should probably take a little bit of the principal. And you'll have made your first $1 million by age 45. Okay? Doing nothing but putting $18,000 away on a Dow 30 and don't touch it. That's not too bad, folks. Millionaire at 45? Okay. Okay. So then maybe you're not quite so responsible, but you're smart. You put away the maximum for the first 5 years and never add another dime. You don't even bother with all that crazy 401k stuff. If you just put away $18,000 for the first 5 years. You'll put in through this linear portion of the curve, but then compound interest takes over. And you'll have about $2 million at retirement. And you'll have to struggle along at $140,000 a year, living on just the interest. However, you got to remember, everything is going to be far more expensive due to inflation. And in this scenario, you make your first million by age 60. It takes another 15 years. Now let's say you're typical. You're the person who saves nothing. You get to 10 years before retirement and you panic. What do you need to have just $1 million? Okay, so with 10 years of savings, you got to put away $73,000 a year at 7%, which that's crazy. I mean, that is almost undoable. And that will get you about $70,000 a year in badly deflated dollars. Okay, this is not the curve you want to be on. So the takeaway message is saving is the most important when you're young due to compound interest. The one caveat I would give you guys is watch out for investment fund management fees. A couple percent difference has a huge impact. So try to go with the funds that have the lowest fees. So let's talk some more about this inflation stuff. We've seen that compound interest can really work to your benefit, but inflation really cuts into those benefits, and it compounds too. So let's say that we're going to consider the example of a loaf of bread and what that's going to cost the year that you retire. So if you're currently looking at a loaf of bread that's $4 and inflation remains steady for the next 45 years, that loaf of bread is going to cost $9.75 when you retire. So now that $2 million or that $478,000 a year is badly devalued in real buying power. So don't go planning on buying the Ferrari, at least not out of your retirement money. Okay. Geek lesson number 7. Do not be afraid when the stock market corrects. Guys, stuff happens. There will be panics, there will be corrections, there will be Black Mondays, there will be all of that stuff. Do not freak out. When the market goes down, if you have a lot of time until retirement, that is a good thing for you. Because when the market goes down, you are buying stocks cheap. Then when the market recovers, they have a lot more value. Okay. Typically, investment strategists will tell you to just keep buying. You'll buy the lows, you'll buy the highs, and it's all called dollar averaging. And it gets you to that typical 7 to 9%. Okay. Now, you may want to do some investing on the side, which I do as well. When you have a multi-billion-dollar company like BP or Bank of America have some huge event and the stock tanks, think about buying in, as long as the long-term revenue is not affected. So a good example of this would be the BP Deepwater Horizon rig catastrophe that polluted the Gulf of Mexico. That was one rig that caused a major environmental disaster. But even the cleanup of that disaster did not threaten the existence of British Petroleum. BP is just too big. When that rig was on fire, that would have been an excellent time to buy BP. As long as you're using money that you do not need in the near term. And by near term, I always think within the next 5 years. Because the markets will always look different 5 years from now. That said, do not try to time the stock market. Don't try to pull out just because the future looks bleak. Guys, when the markets are down, just turn the radio off. Just stop listening, and you will make serious gains over the long haul. Do not be reactive. Okay, but for some people, this really just doesn't work. They're afraid of the markets, and, we are all different. If the stock market doesn't work for you, okay, you can still buy stocks and get something called dividend income. For example, here are some really good blue chip stocks that are incredibly stable. They are not going to go radically up and down with the market just because they're so big and they have such international exposure. So if I buy $10,000 worth of Verizon Communication, they have a dividend yield of 5.1%. So if I buy $10,000 worth of stock, every year they're going to give me $511 just for holding that $10,000 worth of stock. That's not a bad rate of return, especially when you consider that a savings account might give you 0.1%, quarter percent. These stock dividends are a very good way to have income in retirement. So there's something that should be part of your portfolio and certainly something that should be considered. Geek lesson number 9. A lot of you are probably going to buy houses. And once you do, I would encourage you to buy either a Honda or a Kubota generator that's powered by whatever you heat with. And I'm thinking propane or diesel, not gasoline. Okay. Power outages and natural disasters are just a fact of life, especially in these times of global warming. There was a time back in, I believe it was 1998, I had just graduated from college, and I found all of my friends had to come over and sleep in my living room because of an ice storm. The power was completely out. Nobody had electricity to run their heaters. But fortunately, I had a fireplace in my house, so we broke out the chocolate, marshmallows, graham crackers, and made s'mores in a sleepover. Okay, I want you to remember that if you have a house and you're on a well and the electricity goes out, then you've got no refrigeration, no water, no toilets. This is not fun. I went through it once, and I went out and bought a big old diesel generator. Okay, so no electricity. If you're on a well, you have no toilets. Not a fun time. So I'm an advocate of diesel because number 2 heating oil is chemically the same as diesel, but it does not have the road use taxes. So that makes it a very attractive fuel for a backup generator. It's also far more reliable because the ethanol that's in current gasoline attracts moisture from the air and causes carburetor corrosion in small engines. Diesels, however, they don't have an ignition system. They burn the fuel by simply compressing it until it gets hot enough to ignite. That makes them far, far more reliable. If you do buy a gasoline generator, make sure that when you're done using it, you turn the fuel off and you run the gas out. Or just let it run until the fuel runs out of the tank. It doesn't hurt them at all. And if you leave the carburetor dry, it's much less susceptible to corrosion. That will make it far more reliable in the next emergency. Now that said, I like Honda and Kubota generators. Most of the cheap stuff that you're going to buy in Walmart or any other outlet, your Generacs, your Kohlers, they're only built to last 300 to 600 hours. And then the rings are junk, the castings are junk. The Hondas and the Kubotas, they last much, much longer. I have a big industrial Kubota that used to run an oil well. Yes, it was overkill. However, it's currently got 9,000 hours on it. It runs like a Swiss watch, doesn't burn any oil, and it starts up like it's brand new. I only paid about 15% of the new price on eBay. And I heat with oil, so if I ever have a storm, I always have 275 gallons of generator fuel in the basement because that's what my furnace runs on. So I don't have to be one of these people that'll be lined up in a gas station for, you know, hours and hours to get fuel for my generator. That's just silly. Prepare ahead of time, folks. The other thing to think about is if you have food in the fridge, gotta tell you, groceries are expensive. You might have $300 worth of groceries or $600 worth of groceries in a chest freezer. If the power goes out, the value of that food in the freezer might be more than the value of a cheap generator. So always plan to have a standby source of electricity. So these are some very basic rules. I wouldn't even call them rules. They're basic guidances for you guys. But please take them to heart. You're in a very exciting time in your life and you need to make good choices. And I hope this presentation will let you do that. So congratulations on your graduation and good luck in a bright future. Thanks a lot.